Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am bringing you my 2018 stats, reflections, and 2019 resolutions. First, my 2018 reading stats. In 2018, I read 96 books, which is probably the most books I've ever read in a single year, so I'm very pleased with that. Looking at the months in which I read, it seemed like there was quite a bit of variation between which months I was reading a lot and which months I was reading not so much. But in general, I had a lighter schedule in the summer, and so I read a lot of books in July, August, and September, and I was very busy in June and October, so I've read very few books in those months. Overall, I read about 30,000 pages with an average book length of 320 pages. I'm pretty happy with that because I do read a lot of shorter things such as comic books and novellas, and I also read a couple of longer books such as the Wheel of Time series or the Teddy Roosevelt biography series. Those kind of help balance things out. About half of the books that I read were in the 200 to 400 page range, with a quarter of them less than 200 and a quarter of them over 400. I feel like that's right about what I'm looking for, so I was pretty happy with those stats. My average rating for books that I read in 2018 was 4.2 stars, which is great. Basically, 75% of what I read, I gave 4 stars and above, which meant I loved what I was reading this year. I was very, very happy with the books that I chose, and there were a few books that I didn't like and a few books that I DNF'd as well, which I don't rate, but overall it was a great reading year with really, really good reads. In terms of fiction versus nonfiction ratio, I think I did okay this year. I had about 75% fiction and 25% nonfiction. Within my fiction, I mainly read fantasy, which is my go-to, with sci-fi coming in sort of at a distant second. I'd like to improve those numbers in the coming year because I do want to read more sci-fi, as well as read other things besides fantasy that are fiction. In terms of nonfiction, I read mainly memoirs, but I also had a couple of feminist works and a few self-help books that I read, which were also quite good. This is another area that, again, I want to diversify a little bit next year. Lastly, I looked at 2 statistics about the authors that I read. The first was I looked at the gender of the authors and found that I had 65% of the books I read written by female authors, which I was pretty happy with. But then I decided I should look at how many authors I've read who are POC. And that was a lot more disappointing. So this was not something I was tracking as I was reading in 2018. I just took a look at it this morning and I found I only had 17% of the books that I read written by non-white authors. That's a pretty low number and definitely something that I will keep my eye on in 2019 with a goal of being a little bit more diverse than just more white women, which was the majority of what I read. Next is an evaluation of my 2018 reading goals. So in 2018, I had 1 main goal and 2 sub-goals. My main goal was to read 75 books, which I accomplished. I'm very pleased. I read more than 75 books. I read 96 total, which was quite a bit above my minimum. So that made me very pleased. My first sub-goal was nonfiction. I wanted to read 25 nonfiction books, and I met that exactly. I read exactly 25 nonfiction books. So this was a good challenge for me. I think it felt just about right. Not too easy, not too hard, and kept me working hard at reading more nonfiction. My other sub-goal was to read 25 non-English books, and this I completely failed at. I only managed to read 7 out of 25. And what I found was that it was just really difficult for me to want to pick up a non-English book because I read when I'm tired or when I want to rest or relax, and reading in non-English is just a little bit of a mental challenge for me. So maybe next year I'll do a little bit better with this sub-goal, but for this year, not so much. Next, to reflect on my 2018 reading year. 2018 was a great reading year for me. I read a ton of books and they turned out to be really great books. I read pretty diversely compared to what I read before, in that I read a lot of new authors, I read a lot of nonfiction, I read a lot of things that I hadn't been exposed to before. So for me, that was a pretty good wide reading year, although perhaps I would like to do a little bit more widely in the future. I think there were a number of factors that contributed to 2018 being such a good reading year for me. The first, I think, was that I prioritized reading. So by having a goal of 75 books, which I knew was going to be a challenge for me, it really helped me remember to choose reading instead of other kind of goofing off activities like Netflix or playing solitaire on my phone. So that was really helpful. It was also really helpful to pay attention to community recommendations. Booktube is full of great book recommendations, as is the Reddit subcommunity 52 Books. 52 Books is something that I've been subscribed to for the past year, and I love seeing everybody post each week about what they've been reading. It's very motivating and has a lot of great recommendations. The third thing that I found really helpful was just to read diversely. So the more I chose new books or new genres that I had never read before, it just really made me much more interested and made everything I read feel really new to me. I hope to continue with that in 2019 because that feeling of newness, new ideas, and new experiences is, I think, what I love the most about reading. I also struggled with a few things in my reading year in 2018, most notably the reading non-English books. So I think that challenge was maybe a little bit too difficult for me. I want to make sure that I prioritize having fun when I read. So maybe I just need to scale that back a bit. It also became apparent as I was making this video that I struggled with actually having as much diversity in my reading as I wanted. Clearly, my fiction books were almost all fantasy. That's not as diverse as I want it to be. 75% of the books that I read were fiction. That's not as diverse as I want to be. And then obviously my absolutely dismal numbers for POC authors is clearly not as diverse as I want it to be. Overall, I think that the impact of my reading year in 2018 has been very positive. I feel like I have not only experienced a lot of rest and relaxation through my reading, but I've been exposed to a lot of new ideas and interesting concepts and new worlds that has made my life enriched. So overall, I'm really pleased with how 2018 has gone. Now, on to my 2019 reading goals. In 2019, I would like to have my main reading goal be, again, 75 books. That seemed this year like it was a pretty reasonable challenge, but still one that I could make and not feel bad about including some easier, lighter novellas mixed in with some of the heavier nonfiction or the longer fantasy books. I would also like to keep the same nonfiction sub-goal of 25 books. That seemed to be just right for me. The non-English sub-goal, though, I do think I will scale back to 10 books. That'll still be a challenge, but it won't be quite so daunting as the 25 books was. I would also like to add 3 new sub-goals. The first is to have more diverse perspectives. So I would like to read 25 books that are written from a viewpoint that is different from mine. I'm still a little unsure how I want to count this, but overall, if I read it and I think, wow, that provided some insight into a life experience that is different from mine, I'll count it. The next is poetry. I'd like to read 10 books of collected poems. This is not something that I read too much of, but I realized this year that I actually really do enjoy reading poetry, so I want to try reading more of it. And the last sub-goal is collected books, so books of essays or short stories. This year I have read some amazing collections of essays and short stories, and I think I definitely want that to be a goal of mine to read more of those. Lastly, my 2019 booktube goals. So for 2019, I'd like to focus on reflecting more thoroughly on what I read, and I'd like to do that by creating a posting schedule where each week I do a wrap up of the books that I've read that week, going a little bit in depth on them. I think that I could do a monthly wrap up, but I know I would just drone on forever in a big monthly wrap up, so I'm going to try to do weekly and see how that goes. I also would like to maybe post a second video each week going more in depth on a book or a topic that I enjoy. So I will see if I can do the 2 videos a week posting schedule, but it's worth a try at least. I also would like to watch Booktube more widely. I know there's a ton of great channels out there with really diverse viewpoints and lots of really excellent book recommendations, so I'm going to keep exploring and trying to discover channels that provide me with a new perspective. One other goal that I have for my channel is that I'm going to try to post some reviews that are not in English for the non-English books that I read, just to motivate me a little bit to read them, as well as to practice my speaking skills, which are not great, in the languages that I am trying to work on, namely Spanish, German, French, and Japanese. I'm also very interested in watching booktube channels in these other languages. I have discovered Nur Chaos, who does reviews in German, but if you know of any other channels that do reviews in Spanish or French or German or Japanese, go ahead and let me know about them and I can check them out. Okay, that's it for my 2018 stats and reflections and my 2019 resolutions. So I hope that everybody else has a great beginning to 2019 and enjoy your reading.